Emissions of greenhouse gases and CO2 will have to be more than halved by the year 2050 if global warming is to be limited to not more than 2 degrees Celsius. The world's energy systems are based on fossil fuels, so new technologies are needed to neutralize the greenhouse gas emissions they produce. One solution is carbon capture and storage, CCS. It's one of the measures Europe is proposing to fight climate change.
We look at how much of the emissions in Europe at the moment do come from coal, and it's about a quarter. So it's a huge chunk of the CO2 emissions in Europe which are caused by coal.
In Schwarze Pumpe, Germany, engineers from the Vattenfall company have built a 30-megawatt pilot plant to capture CO2. The plant will burn lignite and hard coal in a mixture of oxygen and recirculated CO2. The water used for the process is then condensed and the concentrated CO2 compressed into liquid. The testing program at Schwarze Pumpe has been running for 3 years now, and the results are extremely promising.
We
had our first experiences with this 30-megawatt pilot-scale plant, and it fulfilled our expectations. The process is stabilized, and we're able to separate about 90% of CO2 with the precipitator. We expect that with advanced technology, we'll be able to build bigger power plants in the future. CO2 can then be stored in carefully selected geological sites. In Ketzin, Germany, the CO2 sink program is testing measuring and monitoring devices to check the safety of underground CO2 storage. Highly pressurized CO2 is injected into a suitable geological formation where it remains trapped under an impermeable caprock cover stone.
So the CO2 is like the blue area here, and it will accumulate underneath the caprock. So that brown one would be the caprock, and the CO2 will not be penetrating the caprock. So this is gas-tight, this is clay stone, and this is sandstone, which is permeable, where the gas can spread, like you see here, and it will then stay here in place.
European companies now have valuable experience with large CO2 storage operations, but more projects are expected in the future. When the CO2 is injected, a number of physical and geochemical processes trapping the gas underground make the storage increasingly effective over time.
This solid piece of rock, you have to think of it like a sponge. So it takes liquids into it, like water or like CO2. And what we also did is, when we did the well bores, we have taken core samples and take them into the laboratory and letting CO2 flowing through the cores and see how the CO2 will react with the minerals in the storage formation and in the caprock.
Underground, the CO2 is in what's known as a supercritical state, which means that it's physically a gas but behaves like a liquid. You can see here how the storage stone absorbs the CO2. To monitor the underground migration of CO2, scientists are testing the reaction of CO2 to heat, electric pulses, and seismic waves.
This well bore is actually a way of monitoring. It's a monitoring device, and we have 3 wells equipped with the electrical cables and the temperature cables to take a close look how the CO2 spreads in the underground.
CO2 is colorless and odorless, so to detect leakages, a whole system of warning devices and CO2 sniffers are placed on the site. Even at the wellhead, people can now move around without any danger.
It's not dangerous, and we have all the safety measures. For example, this is self-closing, a safety valve, and we have another of these in 40 meters inside the wellbore. This is the same standard which is applied in gas storage industry, and they have developed these standards over, let's say, 40 years of experience.
At low concentrations, CO2 is quite harmless. Still, raising public awareness about the different processes to capture and store CO2 is important. An open day where the general public can visit the pilot plant and ask engineers questions can increase the acceptance of carbon capture and storage technology.
Ich finde das ganz notwendig. Man hört so viel von
I think it's necessary because you hear so much from brown coal opponents, and I like the fact that I can see for myself what's being done for the environment and for the reduction of CO2 emissions. You always hear the opposite, and therefore I think it's important that something like this is being done. If we continue on our present path, fossil fuels will still account for nearly 80% of the world's energy by 2030. But the emission trading system should encourage operators of power plants to store CO2 emissions instead of releasing them into the atmosphere and buying emissions allowances. The new European directive on CCS will help to define the framework needed.
What the directive is doing is putting forward all environmental issues that have to be addressed, all safeguards that have to be maintained in order to make sure that the technology is going to protect the environment and not create other problems.
The operator is responsible for the storage on the site, but the new directive lays down the safeguards.
We ask the companies to come forward with a convincing demonstration that the sites are going to be safe in geological terms. You cannot put the carbon anywhere, otherwise it would leak in the underground. So the geological site has to respect a number of very stringent requirements. The Commission is going to review all the selected sites to make sure that the sites are the ones that are the best ones to protect the environment and to maintain the carbon in the underground without problem.
With this new technology on carbon capture and storage, Europe wants to take the global lead in the fight against climate change.
Europe has to take a lead in developing this technology. And of course, that could be very good for us in terms of innovation and creating jobs and export opportunities. Because if we want to get an international deal to secure reductions in CO2 emissions, we've got to bring in China and India. And these countries are hugely dependent on coal for the production of their electricity.
While CCS is perhaps not a silver bullet solution to all problems posed by greenhouse gas emissions, it's an indispensable bridging technology to help diminish those emissions.